We are back.
Yeah, we are indeed. Right, so welcome to In Defense of the Traditional Martial Arts. For the third time, I think I've gone live, and it looks like it's actually working this time. So
Right
I'm
on.
joined with my great.
No, we haven't. No, only obviously just exchange, comments and things. A little bit of, direct messages and, messenger a few times. But yeah, this is our first time really, as I call it, chopping it up. Really, kind of.
Yeah, well, I mean, when did you first start learning Tai Chi? Because you started in the UK, didn't you, while you were on deployment over here, was
Yeah,
it?
yeah, yeah. I started in like 95, early 95, March, April, somewhere in 1995. Stumbled across Tai Chi. Um, in Harrogate, England, actually. It was my ex-wife and I were going to find some event to do for we had some counseling. They said you should have a some event you guys should do together. Some hobby. And it was downtown in the town center, Harrogate, and we saw this advertisement for Tai Chi, where had the number on the little tabs. You pull the number off and everything, give it a little buzz. And so
Proper old school.
proper old school, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And this one gentleman by the name of Bob France was hosting a class that he was doing in Harrogate. A weekly class he had there. Um, just teaching some Tai Chi stuff. And I had this book. I grabbed this book just a second ago. This is old martial arts book. I wish I had the cover, but the cover is old. But it's a book that covers like all different types of martial arts in here, like everything. So you got Samuel Cook, one of the guys I got some stuff from too as well. But he looks super young in this book actually. But I had this book from like the U.S. before I even came to England, and because I was always geeked out the martial arts through the movies and stuff like that. And I always wanted to learn specifically Chinese martial arts because of all the Shaw Brothers movies back in the day. I have friends who did karate. I used to go around with them, sit in the audience or in the bleachers as they did their karate classes. I had no interest whatsoever in it because I was glorified by what I saw in the Shaw Brothers movies. And I was like, that's what I wanted to do. Um, Lo and behold, Tai Chi comes along when I wasn't even looking for it, and I had read about it in this book. In the book, it says it took 15 plus years to become proficient at the art, and so I really never really specifically thought about Tai Chi, but lo and behold, it came up, and then I went to the class. And when I first went, it wasn't even a martial arts class per se. It was a teacher who focused heavily on kind of the esoteric side of Tai Chi. He was a traditional Yang stylist, but he was also doing some Chin and Ching at the time. And he taught me both some traditional Yang style under a guy by the name of Chu King Hung, which your teacher Dan Dockery has some history with as well. That's kind of comical.
Yeah.
And and then that began my journey, really, pretty much starting with Bob France in Harrogate, and he kind of set me on my path by introducing me to my other teacher, David Nicholson, who I, stuck with, still in communication with to the day. So that's kind of how it started, really.
Yeah, and so I was like you in that I started around about that time. I think it was 94, 95, and I was a big fan of the Shaw Brothers movies too. So I always thought, I wanted to do like, the mantis or tiger or crane or something like that. But
Yeah, right.
it was beggars can't be choosers. So there was a Tai Chi class available. I took it, and then I suddenly realised, oh, this is actually way more practical than most of the other kung fu stuff that I've been seeing other people doing.
Sure.
So you say that, so the first class you started wasn't particularly martial. When were you introduced to the martial aspects of Tai Chi?
So I always tell this story because it's kind of hilarious, right? So I'm going along the Bob France and probably with him, probably maybe 3, 4 months, and I was like learning. And he was a very slow paced teacher. He'll teach you like one movement every couple of weeks, and it'll be like that's the opening. Step out, lift your hands. All right, go back to the beginning. So I was going along with him, and then it had to be more than 3 months because I knew a little bit of the movements, and I again had this book and I was geeked out about Bagua. I saw Bagua in the book and I was like, yeah, I'm very interested in Bagua. And he goes, well, I have a friend that kind of teaches Bagua, and I'll see if I can introduce you to him. So he puts me in touch with Dave Nicholson, and in my mind, I'm thinking even with Bob that I'm learning a martial arts in a sense because it's all structural. He's very detailed, very kind of traditional uh, Yang style in the way he did Chap style. He tested every movement, make sure that it was accurate, and he didn't do. I say he wasn't a martial artist, but he knew applications. You know how they're the rudimentary applications for each posture, right? So he
Yeah,
would do certain things just based on the applications of it, like almost like the demo stuff that we typically would do with Tai Chi. So he would test it out to make sure it was structurally sound, make sure it was timing was accurate, as like lifting your hands with your breath, and it was engaged and all that good stuff. So, anyway, long story short, to popping over to Dave, he introduced me to Dave, or gave Dave my details. I called Dave up. We set up a meeting. I go out to his house. He has a little. He's building his own house at the time, but he had a little room that he would train in, right? And some of the videos I have posted up is that little room has some mirrors and all that good business. It was his training room in his own house that he built himself, right? So I go there. I'm all like, yeah, in my Tai Chi gear and everything, my kung fu outfit, and he goes, okay, well, I only teach a few people. Really, don't teach a lot of people. Bagua, really, basically no one. I was like, okay, cool beans. And he's like, well, first before I teach you anything, let me see your Tai Chi. So, I start off doing my form, showing them my movements and this, that, and everything. Typical Dave, typical Yorkshire kind of mannerism. He said, your Tai Chi's crap. I'm not teaching you anything until you get your Tai Chi sorted, man. So there you go. So I'll start teaching you. Along with Bob, I'll teach you,
yeah,
Tai Chi. Well, and they both were under Chu King Hung. Um,
right.
I think Bob was more direct. Dave had a teacher by the name of Ray Wilkie, who also had taught him some Bagua as well. That was his Bagua teacher as well. And so from there, it started working with Dave, and Dave was the diehard martial artist. I mean, he had a background. His dad was like a Lonsdale boxer, so he learned how to box when he was younger. He took karate and taekwondo when he was younger. I think he even did a bit of aikido before, but he had did uh, karate for a while. I think it was Shotokan he did for a while, and then he picked up Tai Chi somewhere on his path, and he's like, man, this is like very similar to you. This is far more practical than what I was doing already. And so he just kind of like immersed himself into Tai Chi. He was a traditionalist. He was Yang style traditional guy all the way. And then it was him who just like just had this breadth of knowledge on martial arts and fighting, and he's a rugged Yorkshire guy. So he came up hard. He fought out in, the places that he fought in, just like, among the people that he hung out with, like, if you will, got into his little scraps and things
Yeah,
like that. So he brought that into the way he taught his martial arts. You know what I mean? His understanding from like, this bloke over here might have a bottle, so you can't just stand here and go into pose. You got to be ready for, that was his mindset all the time. It's like he was consciously thinking about like, hey, you don't know when things are gonna pop off, so you gotta have
yeah,
to,
yeah,
yeah. And that was an interesting thing about being in England, which was different from being in the U.S. So I mean, I wasn't a person that got into a lot of trouble, but around people who got into fights and stuff like that. I had one of my best friends that always would get into trouble and would fight a lot, but it always kind of sometimes had the worry of going into gun violence, right? And one thing I
yeah,
noticed about England is it was always up close and personal. You know what I mean? From talking to you to straight to a headbutt, and then it's
yeah,
on. It's it was
yeah.
very like that. No matter where you find yourself.
I mean, yeah, one of the first fights I ever found myself in back in the '90s involved me getting headbutted by somebody else that got too close to me.
Yeah. So that brought it in itself a lot more awareness about things, the way you stood, the way kind of your distance, understanding of distance,
Yeah,
position. Where you were in a place. You know what I mean? Am I close to the door? Am I close to stairs? That's always a key thing. You know what I mean? Am I close to a rail? Like I'm out in the clubs. I used to go out to clubs a lot. I used to DJ and things, being leads a lot. and even in York a lot and things like that. So sometimes something happened. I'm like looking at me, get over here, scoot over here to the stairs or to the rail because they come this way, they're going over the rail or they're going down the stairs. That was my my thought, and that was something that Dave was always conscious of. When he's talking about stuff, make sure you're in the right place. You know what I mean? Where you're
Yeah,
gonna be. So yeah, he's the one who got me definitely going down that martial path with Tai Chi.
yeah. And how long had you been training for before you competed for the first time?
Oh wow, that's the funniest thing too because Dave kind of pushed us into it because we were thinking like, crap, we don't know enough to compete. So we were doing forms, of course, the competitions and forms, but
Yeah,
it was early on, man. I would say after 2 years of form practice, and then getting really into pushing hands, pretty heavy with Dave. That was just he was a big into that. He was trying to mimic what he saw Chu King Hung do and some of the other ones back in the day. We had the
yeah,
videotape of all the little crazy demos and stuff like that. So Dave was
yeah,
constantly
yeah,
trying to figure out how's this stuff work like that. How are they doing this? And he had his experiences with Chu King Hung. Obviously now he broke the code since then, but back then the information was very sparse, far more secretive about how they were doing the techniques, or as we call them, the tricks of the trade back then. You know what I mean? And so you were
yeah,
like,
yeah,
stuck into first you're stuck into the dogma of dialogue and verbiage, right? You have to work on, being sung. You have to work on your sensitivity. You have to work on your chi. You have to work all these things, and so you're lost in all this stuff, and really not realizing in the midst of that you're really developing your body. You're developing your understanding of body mechanics, understanding how to connect that with the way you think, the way you understand connectivity to another person. What their dynamics are like in their body, what their positioning is like. All those things are less focused on, and more the esoteric stuff was thrown out there in the mix. So after about 2 years, Dave was like, "Hey, we need to go start putting this stuff to the test. We need to go and see how this
yeah,
stuff works against people outside of our class because it's fun and good to test with your people in your class, but you start to know people, you start to know their habits, and sometimes it becomes accommodating, of course. You know what I mean? Because I think when you work, even your classmates, sometimes if you're progressing more than your other classmates, they already kind of have a defeated mindset that you're already going to do something to them that they are going to, compromise themselves for.
yeah,
You know what I mean? They get shy about trying or testing things out sometimes because they already know that, are in their mind thinking that you're going to best them. So when you have to go outside the environment when no one knows you, it brings another set of variables into play. That now you're really going to have to really test out what you really know versus what you got comfortable with. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the things that I really regret of my youth, like starting in Tai Chi, was my teacher was very much against competing.
Hmm.
I think he kind of thought, if we went out and competed and lost, he might lose some students. And I think I only ever competed in like two pushing hands events. I got a bronze in one and got beaten in the first round by the guy who got to the finals and
Yeah.
lost. Uh, he lost. I think it went to I don't know what you call it, but like they'd gone through. They were equal points for the timer, and it was like next point wins.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
So,
I felt like I did all right, but I never did two pushing hands competition. Never did move and step because we never really practiced move and step.
oh
But
wow.
people he had surrounded himself with. I mean, he started learning under Dan Doherty, which is who I then started to learn with.
Yeah.
And by which time I was more focused on like the fighting part of it.
Sure
Pushing
thing.
hands is great, but what happens when someone swings a punch at your head?
Yeah.
and and again, with the classes that I was in, there weren't enough people kind of wanting to go that far. So I had to go to other classes to try out my Tai Chi. I had to go to like Muay Thai classes or
Oh
Kyokushin
wow.
classes. And
Very
my
interesting.
sparring held up though. That was the interesting part was, where people say Tai Chi doesn't work. It's like, but I was mixing it with the best of those classes. And you are like an enigma, I'd say, in that you have only ever trained Tai Chi as like a proper system, haven't you?
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
was your teacher Godfrey? Was Godfrey your teacher?
Well, Godfrey
One of them.
ended up my main teacher, but
Okay.
he was very up for like competing, and I still
Yeah.
I yeah, well, I'll get into a story about him
Okay.
later,
Okay.
but no, my initial teacher was he he died uh end of last year. It was
Oh,
Keith
Simon.
Bruce.
Oh, Keith.
No, it's
Okay. Okay. Oh,
Keith
thinking.
Bruce. Yeah, I don't think he wasn't like a name in the community really. He was
Sure. Sure.
just a guy doing Tai
Right
Chi,
on.
but yeah, I sort of went past him, I think, sort of pretty early in terms of skill level, and
Sure.
he was always quite resentful for it, and we kind
Oh,
of
gee.
parted ways, yeah, pretty early on. And then, yeah, I started at Dan's seminars, and then Godfrey Dornley. I mean, he is a machine, and his
I
lessons were
remember him.
way harder than Dan's. And so I kind of, being young and stupid, I kind of thought, well, that's the treatment I want is
Yeah.
yeah, that being pushed hard. But you
But
you you fought Sandshoe a lot as well, didn't you? Like in
yeah,
the
so you
early
were
days.
mentioning about there being an anomaly. Yeah, so that was kind of one of the things that my teacher Dave was big on the fact that like I mentioned to you about his experience. He had a person that pretty much he was like an artist, and I was his sculpture. You know, um,
Right. Yeah, yeah.
he had a person that had no other experience except for Tai Chi. And because I came, from a traditional background, I know I get a lot of flack now because, later on I started doing modern forms and things like that. But my background, the longest background, is traditional Yang, and so I just bring all that with me into, the modern stuff, if you will. So I have a modern form with traditional kind of understanding and principles, I guess, if you will. But his biggest thing, which was funny because he would always look at videos of Tai Chi masters and things like that, and we had all the named masters from China, from the Wu family to the Hao style to you name it, Yang style, whatever. And his biggest thing is like, how come none of I'll put it like he would put it. How come none of these fuckers are fighting? So
Yeah.
and so that was a little frustration for him. He said,
Yeah.
we get a bad rap and Tai Chi, but none of these guys want to step up and fight and show them what this stuff is really about. And that was his push for us going into competition in the first place. It's like he had something to prove. He had a chip on his shoulder about Tai Chi, about traditional Tai Chi and how it should be represented, and then he wanted to be the one that's carrying the flag. And that's funny enough, as you mentioned, Dan is, Dan was his kind of his point of reference. Like the only person that has been doing it is Dan Doherty, and I know you can do it just as much as they can do it. You know what I mean? And Dan is the only one that's been
Yeah.
able to, to show it in the ring and things like that. And when we started with pushing hands, and we always looked at pushing hands definitely for us. We and I think this kind of frustrates me too a little bit, right? Pushing hands we know is a drill. We know is a sensitivity drill, balance drill,
Yeah.
however else you want to do it. And I think because of the competition part of it and them not having another name for it, they just call it pushing hands competition. It could have been something else, a name for it as it branched off into the competitive side of it. But it's called what it's called. You know what I mean? So we
Yeah.
understand it's not the same thing as if you're trying to, train it as a training drill. But however, it was a bridge for us to say, okay, now how do we take this understanding of pushing hands and recognize that as I'm going around, I'm viewing this as somebody throwing a punch in. So now I want to get that punch away from me, right? Or I'm seeing if they're going to try to grab, so I'm going to kind of, kind of take that grab off of my wrist or whatever. So we would take that understanding from pushing hands and put it into more of a dynamic setting, if you will, and that was our branch into competition as far as pushing hands goes. Then when we start to go into fighting, we had already started doing throws and our pushing hands, sweeps and our pushing hands, and looking at it from more of a dynamic perspective from there. The only thing that was kind of lacking then it was the striking and the kicks, and
Yeah.
that's what we had to do to go into full contact competitions and things like that. So when Rural put on their matches in Liverpool, that was the first place that we went. Then we started going to I think the Zon thing was the other competition that had a lot of the fighting and Sen style stuff going on as well. And then what Dan would host down in Oxford.
Yeah,
Is
that's where I thought it was at Oxford.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We went on some of the same stomping grounds, obviously, without it would be
That's what's crazy.
common.
Our paths must
Yeah,
have crossed several
exactly,
times really in those years.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at the time, I had hair. I'm not sure how short your hair was at the time.
Yeah, it's very short. It was Action Man short, my hair was.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, no beard, obviously.
so beard, right on, right on.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, the fighting side of things. We were doing it to one get ourselves exposed to it, but the way I trained for that, as I mentioned in other interviews as well, other people who asked me about it, is Dave would go and have us go. He had a friend who had a gym in York. There was boxers. That was kind of our first thing. Um, I was sent to, right? To kind of get a feel for somebody throwing punches. Now, you've been doing pushing hands. Now this guy's gonna be throwing punches. However, I want you to stick to your Tai Chi principle. Don't go into a kickboxer mindset. Don't go into a boxer mindset. I want you to see what you can do against a boxer. It's gonna be faster. And we had another person that Dave was learning from by the name of Richard Watson, and he had a son by the name of Simon Watson who had already been doing some Sandot stuff. And he always say, "Yo, man, yeah, it's tricky going in there with boxers because they are a lot faster than what you think they are. You know what I mean? Their hands are fast." And again, going back to what I mentioned earlier on with Bob France, when you're learning Tai Chi applications, you get used to the arms being out there, and you can do whatever you want to the person because they're leaving their punch out there to grab, and you can do all your little techniques. Well, when you get into that environment, no one's leaving their hands out there
Yeah.
anymore. And also they're not stopping and standing in one position. They're cutting angles. They're going in different locations. But that goes back to pushing hands for me, understanding Dalu on a grander scale because that's where
Yeah,
it goes in
absolutely.
understanding your footwork. And so when you mentioned about you only did fixed step, I was very proficient. I was most proficient at moving step pushing hands, more so than fixed step.
Which is the better one to be proficient at. Let's be like honest here. But I think a lot of people, I think, uh, if I remember correctly, like the fixed step was the popular one. Like the fixed step competitions, there were loads of people entering those. And then when it had come to like moving step pushing hands, there were only a handful of people ever in any of the categories. Is
Exactly,
my
and
memory
usually
of it.
and that was good for me in a different aspect because usually I found myself going against bigger people because there wasn't so
Yeah.
many mixed people in there. So I'm usually finding myself actually having to go against higher weight or the weight class is so such a wide range that I'm included into bigger the mix of bigger folks, and it paid me dividends because then that helped me later on as I start to mix with other people that were bigger than me. I'm used to it now. I'm so acclimated to being tested on that level, I guess, if you will. So
I mean, it's interesting that you say about coming from like a more a moving step, pushing hands, going into the full contact fighting. Because when you watch your fight videos, it's very evident that that is the style that you had. You were using punches to get into clinches to then throw your opponents. It was was that was that just what happened, or was that the game plan from the start?
the game plan that Dave had was take their fucking route.
Oh, why you say that? Just Rob's on here saying, "Was that an impression of Dave I just heard?"
Yeah.
Yeah,
He knows very well. He knows all too well. Yeah, yeah. But
yeah.
yeah, Dave was he was brash, but he was a matter of fact. You know what I mean? He said how he
Yeah.
he said it how he felt it. And he didn't sugarcoat pretty much anything. He called me the diplomat because usually if he said something and it caught someone offhand, I'll be there to kind of smooth over what his meaning was.
Well, you are the diplomat. I mean, I find it very hard. Like you remain under criticism, a very nice, happy, smiley guy that is very breezy. What's being said to him? I can't sort of sit there and take that sort of stuff when people are going on about it, especially when you post actual full contact fights and you've got people that have never even competed in pushing hands telling you how you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. Well, it goes with the territory, man. I mean, it's like I always think of it as like so we have tools, right? So it's like someone getting a hammer. You have a hammer, and you're nailing you're putting the nail into the wall, boom boom, hammering it in, and then you turn the hammer around and you say, you know what, I need to pull this nail out. Oh, let me pull this one out over here too. So, oh crap, it's a screw. But you still got the bottom of the hammer, and now you start twisting the hammer around to get the screw out. You understand how to use the tools more than one way. And I think it
Yeah,
frustrates people so much that they've only been able to apply it in the way that was taught to them and given to them, and never been able to take it and use it for anything else outside of that scope. And when they see someone using that outside of that, like, that's not how you use a fucking hammer. That's not how you use a hammer. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, that's my understanding and my mindset. I look at it. It's like, okay, well, I understand how to be adaptable with the tools that I have. And what's paid me dividends for doing that is doing all the competitions that I have because I've competed outside of just doing Tai Chi. I competed against people doing Wing Chun, Trolley
yeah,
Foot.
yeah,
I've competed now with folks who do Muay Thai. I competed with people doing, strictly kickboxing. And I lost my first professional match against the champion who was a Romanian kickboxer. And, you know, um, it was very challenging for me because I'm so used to being able to do what you mentioned about being a closer distance than throwing, but those are my first experience of someone understanding how to sprawl. I didn't even know what sprawling
right.
was, and they
Yeah,
were, they were, stuffing my takedowns and things like that. We'll do takedowns, but we'll both go down, so I get no points for it. I'm like, ah,
yeah, yeah,
very frustrating. But then he could strike and he could kick, and I was deficient in that department, so that made me get better at striking and kicking after the fact. And understanding how that was a method of getting the connection, getting them to get distracted by my kicks or
yeah.
my punches to get into where I really want to get into.
So I mean, with the Sandshu, so Sandshu is now Sandar,
Yeah, yeah,
and I only ever competed once. I compete basically because every year I'd turn up and I'd watch the people at the Oxford. That was the British Open back then,
yeah. Big
and I
difference.
would criticise him. I go, "Oh, he hasn't done that right. Oh, that's too, that's muscle. That's not skill." And then me and my friend at the time, my co-trainer, we would look at it and go, "Well, that's not how it should be." And then we were like, "Well, we can't really criticize it if we've never done it, you know." So we were against competing, but kind of both agreed to compete just to prove what we were saying was right. And
Yeah.
then I won that fight and kind of thought, well, what I said was true. There's no need to compete anymore.
Ah.
It's an easy cop out, you know. I wish I regret, if I could go back, I'd have done a lot of different things. But anyway, point originally being the rule set for Sandshu at the time was you couldn't continuously hit to the head, although that always went out the window.
Yeah.
You were supposed to hit to the head, then body, then head kind of stuff. Uh, you had to wear a head guard, 8-ounce gloves, and you had to have shin and instep protectors. And the rule set was you got a point for getting them out of the area, if I'm correct. Was
Something
it
like
2
that. Yeah.
points for throwing someone, I think? And, yeah, and it had to be a clean throw as well, didn't it? It had to be you had to
Clean
get the
throw.
person on the ground without you falling over as well.
Yeah. No knees, no elbows. In that environment, and so no padding.
Is there a
Yeah, no
difference?
paddings, just the gloves. No
Right,
footwear. You just had
just the
shorts and
gloves.
gloves, cup, mouthpiece, and that was it. And again,
Right.
in that environment, also no elbows, no knees were allowed. But throws were allowed, and it was on a raised platform, so no
Yeah,
rope. So you can throw them out if you want. Or throw them off the canvas if you want. Slams, throws, all that good stuff was still, still there. All the typical punches, typical kicks, sweeps, all that good business. Um, Obviously, we had gloves on, but no one really focused on locks. If I remember correctly, you can clinch, but only for a certain amount of time, and then the ref will break you up. So it was just pretty much, I guess you want to say, striking and throws, takedown. This kind of was it, if you will, just minus the elbows and knees. Oh, still there? There you
Yeah,
go.
yes. Sorry, I was listening to it, and then someone's just come to the door to say something, but my missus has dealt with that. Yeah. So how many? How? So you had quite a lot of amateur fights, I remember.
I had altogether, I think, amateur fights about
7.
seven,
Wow,
seven or eight.
that's 6 more than I had. And
Yeah,
how
yeah,
many
yeah.
pro fights did you have?
I had 5 pro fights, I believe. Yeah,
5 pro fights.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I was
And you
3-2 in my pro.
pro career.
And matter of fact, I lost again to another one of you guys. That was Sammy Barrick. He was my last pro fight.
Ah. Right, yeah.
Yeah, he was. I think he was one of Neil's students, if I remember correctly. Neil
Yeah.
Rosiak.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, we had a good little match. Two touchy guys going at it, and match that was good. I think that was around about 2000 or 2001, somewhere around that time frame.
Yeah. Well, I could say, yeah, when I fought, that was the year 2000, I think I fought. And like I say, that was a amateur level.
Yeah.
And I was really saddened to hear, I think it was 2019, I heard that they'd stopped doing the the full contact at the British Open. They no longer did it.
Oh
It
wow,
sort of,
that's very interesting.
yeah, and it sort of, oh, did you know? Yeah, and it's like it just shows to me like the trajectory that Tai Chi's got nowadays is this downward play towards the practical and just completely going towards. I'd say in this country, not so much the woo. In this country, it's just more turn it into like a moving yoga.
Yeah.
The
Well,
focus is on exercise.
when I came here to America, I came back to America. So I started my training in '95. I came back to the states in 2001. No, yeah, 2000. I actually came here in 2000, and I mean summer of 2000, and I was really surprised at the difference between what I was doing with Tai Chi and what was here for Tai Chi. It was very, very uniquely different. And I mean that in a way of like going back to what you mentioned about it was more, a lot of soft play. No one was really engaged into any kind of martial side of it, but not sincere martial side. What I mean by that, and these were the people that I experienced. So I came back here to Texas, in the southern part of the U.S. Right. So Tai Chi in San Antonio wasn't necessarily big, but I met some people who did it. But the highest focus was on form, some pushing hands, but the pushing hands were all like pretty much patterns, a little bit of freestyle, but not many people really dabbled into it. Had a friend that introduced me to some people. I'm in San Antonio, so there's another town here, another city here called Houston, which is about a little over 3 hours away. He introduced me to some of his people out in Houston, where they were doing chin style, and so I intermingled with them a little bit. But I was pretty much closeted because everyone that I really wanted to do Tai Chi with wasn't doing it on the martial level. It was pretty much form practice and the dogma of trying to connect it with just the understanding of chi and things like that. And because I know I'll get some flack with people about my talk about chi, and I don't think I say what's the word I want to use. I don't have a disbelief in the term or the concept of chi. Just my concept is not doesn't align with others' version of chi. What I was
Yeah,
taught and what I was given about chi was that it was if you want to call it intrinsic energy. If you got a lung disease, if you got a heart disease, that's going to affect your chi because your body's going to be weakened in some way. You got some mental health issues, it's going to weaken your chi because
yeah,
all these things. So your body in totality, the healthiness of your body and your mind, the way you breathe, is all built into your chi. Now you take that what you have with your physical attributes, you tie that into how you're implying something, because your chi is also your intent, how you want to do something and how you want to apply it. Everything has to be engaged with that. So if your chi is weak or deficient in any way, none of that's going to pan out to its best level. You're not going to be fully empowered to be able to do what you want to do. Now, I don't think chi on its own. If I was a person who didn't study martial arts and I said I do qigong, I don't think I have the power to punch someone and knock someone out, right? Because I
Yeah,
don't even know how to punch. Just because I've been practicing Qi Kung doesn't
yeah,
mean I understand how to place my hand in the right position to knock someone out. Now, does it mean that if I don't practice Qi Kung and Qi, I can't knock anyone out? No, it doesn't. So there's two kind of different kind of pathways because people who practice qigong don't necessarily practice a martial art, and not all people who practice martial arts practice some form of qigong. So
yeah.
I think it does have its benefit to make you more centrally focused on the capabilities of your body and your mind, and how it ties into coordination of your movements and your breath and so forth and so on. Um, but it doesn't mean that it stands out on its own to be this powerful thing that stands out on its own that allows you to do whatever you want with someone. You know what I mean?
And yeah, I totally get it. That aligns with my views on chi,
Yeah.
like my own beliefs, and the bit that I've really struggled to understand, and perhaps you can talk about this a bit as well, is there's so much focus on developing chi to turn someone into a martial artist. And the way I view it is, if you train to be a martial artist, you're going to sort your own chi out anyway, to a large extent. But if you only train chi, you're not going to develop as a martial artist. The idea that people are throwing out there at the moment is that you can do standing meditation for 4 hours a day, and that's going to turn you into a killer. And it's like, I don't get the mindset. I don't get how people can actually believe that. Like, is it? Do you think it's because they're just living in a fantasy world where Shaw Brothers movies are real life, or is it that is it that they? I don't know. I'm struggling with it.
Well,
Like, is it
no,
just that they've never been punched in the face before?
and I think that's a combination of a few things, right? So I think the main thing is sometimes, like I mentioned earlier about me going into competition, breaking outside the bubble of my own classmates and then outside of the scope of my teacher. A lot of times that we find is that most of folks that talk in that manner, they stay in a bubble. They stay protected by what they're doing amongst who they're doing it with. And so it's, and I'm not saying this and this is going to sound disrespectful, but I'm not saying it in a disrespectful way, right? But it's easy to be the king of shit on a shit pile, right? So everybody is shit with you, and you're the king of shit. Then okay, you know what I mean. So it's easy to be the king of everybody who's doing the exact same thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But
big
go
fish in a little pond.
right on, right on. So
Yeah,
and I think a lot of times, unless you go outside that bubble and apply those things, um, to give you a fuller picture, doesn't mean that you can't take those same principles and apply them outside your environment and be successful. But I think if you're using your bubble to be the measurement of how successful this is, you're quite delusional in that. Because, and it's easy to talk down on something that you never done and say,
yeah,
oh, yeah, well, they're not as good as I am because in my thing, I am the greatest, right? All right, so take that. It's like, I mean, because I'm by trade, I'm a computer programmer, right? But if you take understanding math and you just did math all the time and you just did addition, subtraction, and multiplication and became very good at it, but you don't have practical understanding of math to be able to use it, for doing your checkbook or doing scientific formulas or doing it for understanding logic. You know what I mean?
yeah,
You have a very limited use of that tool, and I think that's the thing that I find with most people. They have a tool, but they're keeping it so limited and so protected in that little bubble that when you test it outside that bubble, there's fear, that it's not going to work, or that not even fear, there's delusion that it's going to work the same way that you've been using it all the time. And then something breaks that rule, you can't deal with it. You know what I mean? The
yeah,
best thing
yeah,
to tell someone is that, okay, yeah, I'm a traditionalist with the stuff I do. I believe that I can use my chi energy and my understanding of the principles of this art to stop someone who does takedowns in jujitsu. How I know that is because I just have it in my mind, but I never tested against someone who did,
yeah,
right? So the best way to prove that point is not for you to go necessarily to go practice jujitsu, but just to go practice with someone who does jujitsu and see how that works. And it doesn't mean just because you have some flaws in proving that point that you can't go back and then now this is what we would do. We go back and then study what faults or flaws you have in your understanding of your art that may created that deficiency. And now tie in your principles like, oh, okay, I know what I should have done. Instead of going yielding back and dropping my shoulders back, I need to tuck my hips down. I need to drop and turn my hips when I go, so you get a better understanding of really how to apply your art to that degree. And that's kind of what I've done across the board. And most folks who you will see if they're commenting on me outside of Tai Chi, they'll relate back to my Tai Chi saying, wow, Mike has a great understanding of it. Not because, oh, Mike is great at jujitsu, or Mike is great at kickboxing or Muay Thai. The way he understands Tai Chi is so well that when he mixes with other folks, it doesn't matter what they're doing. He's still being able to apply his Tai Chi principles in that environment, you know?
We,
And,
yeah, we
oh, lost you. Say that again.
have with people when they talk about you can't compete in Tai Chi, like gloves and rules mean Tai Chi is no longer effective. And you're like, but if you don't have the skill level to deal with other people trying to punch you in the head, how do you hope to have that same skill level in a street altercation with somebody that wants to really hurt you? Like, if you can't handle someone throwing a full force punch at your head that's padded, how are you expecting to deal with somebody who's throwing a bare knuckle punch at your head full force? It's
Yeah.
I can't
And,
get
and
my head around that sort of logic.
yeah, and the other part of that logic is that are you telling me that you only again have a limited understanding of your own martial art? You only have a limited skill that you only have one variance and one speed level of that. So it's like, oh yeah, well my stuff is too deadly. Is it? Then how do you practice it?
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, how do you?
That's a perfect point. Yeah, how do you practice it? Yeah, if it's so deadly, I did. There was a comment yesterday on the third gym. No, I think it might have been a Yang uh, forum actually, where someone was saying like they can't practice with punches because even if it's 50% punches, like it feels like their kidneys are going to explode. And it's like, if that was the case, you'd be like, heavyweight champion of the world right now, raking the money in. If you could throw 50% punches and have people feel like their kidneys are about to explode, you're going somebody's going to take that skill and they're going to put it into the fighting world and make a lot of money. But
Yeah,
it feels like it's just delusional to me.
yeah. It's and I guess what frustrates me about it is that as an art, I'm very passionate about Tai Chi, and I'm very kind of, want to carry the flag for Tai Chi. We have people within Tai Chi that, discredit you because, you're doing it from a different perspective than how they can do it or they want to do it. Whereas, you should be saying, oh, look, this is a representative of Tai Chi that's able to show what I'm talking about, what I'm trying to kind of, refer to as being a martial art. But on the same token, when you have limited skills to be able to show that, I don't have to beat someone down to prove to them that I understand Tai Chi and they understand that I know Tai Chi. You know what I mean? I can do certain things to them like, oh crap, oh man, he didn't have to, break my wrist. He didn't have to, completely slam me on the floor. I met
Yeah,
someone a couple weeks back, that was the case. And, he was very kind of open about his disdain for Tai Chi and the way people was doing Tai Chi and, teaching Tai Chi and he reached out to me to meet up and in my mind it's like, oh, thinking this guy really wants to test me to really see if I'm like, you know, and what
yeah,
other people were saying or whatever. Then when he met me, he was like, "Oh crap, I didn't realize." Like, in fact, you're taking your level down because I realized like you really could, what I mean, like do
yeah,
some
right,
damage.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's what I mean by if you have enough skill, if you're that skillful, you don't have to take it to the highest level to show that you have skill.
no,
You know what I mean? That's like, I always again relating this back to math. Like, you got to start at the foundational. You can't go into calculus when you need to teach someone basic math. You
yeah,
know what
yeah.
I mean? Like, you know, that makes no sense. It's not logical.
So I was talking earlier about, we were talking about back in the 90s, we had people feeling like they needed to prove themselves. I guess nowadays we live in a society where those that want to prove themselves have kind of moved into more, kickboxing, MMA, Thai boxing sort of areas. Like in America, you do a lot of traveling, a lot of training with different Tai Chi people. Do you come across many schools where they actually still spar, or is that like a no-no these days?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, I go to a place in Houston, and my friend, he's a chin stylist. I've known him for over 20 plus years. He has a school, and he kind of that's what we do. He has a quarterly meetup, and he invites other schools, other styles to come along, and we'll have a signed up like you see those signed up meetups, and he really champions that. There are more so, I think, people in that area that I know of, and I know of other schools, but it's not a large number. It's the small, like the 1%. You know, everyone else relates to either doing pushing hands or they're showing application demos, if you will, at best. But they look at that kind of stuff as being first thing they'll say, "Oh, that's external." All right, cool.
Yeah,
All right, and then the next thing is that that's not Tai Chi because you're not sticking to their arms, you're not adhering. Like as if you are telling me if somebody's going to attack you that they're going to first hold on, let me stick to your arms before I punch you, so that way you can show me how good you are at defending what I'm about to do to you. It makes no
yeah,
logical sense. Like, and then the first thing they'll say is again, like we mentioned, I'm too deadly for the streets. Well, and I mentioned to you earlier, like being in the UK, sometimes you don't know when someone is really coming with a smile to knock your teeth out. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
you don't know when that's going to happen. So that you're building up, or you're making up the scenario in your head of an ideal situation that doesn't necessarily exist, and you try to do it so it can favor the way that you want to train, the way that you don't have to come outside your bubble. And the one thing I always look at, if you go back, and this is even before I trained, right? But even you go back to the '90s, I used to look at it like those who did martial arts was those guys over there, and it was everybody else. It was such a small percentage, and they stood out because they really kind of practiced martial arts, and they did it to that level. I think when UFC came about, that was the beginning or the burgeoning of everyone wants to become a fighter, and now you have it where you can't go down the street and find someone who's not wearing a shirt that refers to BJJ tap out or whatever it is, right?
yeah,
And someone has some kind of relationship to some form of a martial art. And what happened is when that happened, I think it forced more people who weren't really training sincerely into their bubble, because now you got people out here who are really like going to Muay Thai classes, who are going to true kickboxing classes, true, taking wrestling lessons. UFC brought about the exposure of people going in and really getting involved in martial arts, and those
yeah,
who could market their martial arts and stay in their bubble forced them more into a bubble, because now, hey, we got other people out here that will test you, uh, you know, when you not don't want to be tested. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And
yeah.
so,
But
you know,
I also think that I believe that there's a lot of people that navigate towards Tai Chi because they feel like, well, I can still give myself the illusion that I can fight, but I don't have to actually ever take a punch to the face
yeah,
ever. Like I can pretend that I know what I'm doing, but I don't ever have to go through the grueling aspects of learning to actually be able to fight. And I feel like I feel like it's a losing battle. I feel like each year Tai Chi is just gonna dilute and dilute until it does just become this moving form of uh yeah, what did I call it earlier? A moving form of exercise that old people do in the park.
yeah. I mean, if you look at it, so for instance, I have it on my computer's over off to my right over here, right, and I'm looking at the name of the group that on my page right now, and it says Yang Family Tai Chi Group. And what just stood out to me just now as we were talking, only just now as we're talking, is that it says Yang Family Tai Chi Group. There's no mention of Chuan in there, right?
Yeah,
And I think, you know, that's become the thing that's been removed. I don't say whether it's purposely or whether it's a way of keeping yourself from having to engage in that by just saying, "Oh, I teach Tai Chi classes." You know what I mean? And I don't teach Tai Chi Chuan, or Tai Chi Chuan doesn't really mean fist. You know, it's more so about this,
yeah.
that, and the third. They can define it however they want to, and I think one of the biggest disservices within Tai Chi itself as a historical practice is the lack of documentation about how to use the movements. You know, everyone always refers to the classics and refers to the principle and things like that. But since there has never been true, lined out, this movement is designed for this or these kind of actions and techniques. Which one way I can understand because I'm very creative with principle. I can come up with multiple movements for one posture, easily, right? Um,
Yeah.
but however, I think because of that, you know, as it's gotten older, in years, the removal of a connection between truly fighting makes it easy for people to say what they want to say about Tai Chi and the way it should be expressed and articulated. And I look at it like this too as well. People go back and they talk about Yang Lu Chan being invincible or this master fought so many people and they won this. The only video reference we have of anybody doing Tai Chi is extremely embarrassing. And I remember Dave and I, like, we were talking about it. Oh, there's a fight between the Tai Chi guy and then this, and we were talking about it for ages. And then eventually, and it's weird because the video was so obscure, and we finally got a hold of it. And we stood in his room with arms crossed, looking up at his camera up in the corner. I mean, up to his TV in the corner, and it's like, what in the hell are we watching? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I remember when I first found that footage on YouTube, and I thought, "Oh my God, I'm about to see some Shaw Brothers-esque like magic here. Like we're going to see what Tai Chi really could look like." And yeah, and then I saw it, I was like, "Oh my God, that guy's never been in a fight before in his life."
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, and I guess like I'm trying over here to like get like the Fajin meetup that we had. Um,
Yeah.
we're trying to put in, I guess, a few sort of inter-club competitions for people to get involved with, like
Right.
some sparring, some pushing hands sort of stuff, and try and reignite some passion for the martial side of Tai Chi. Like, I don't care. Like, if people just want to do it as an exercise, yoga was the word I was trying to think of
Oh
earlier.
yeah.
I don't
Yes.
know why I
Right.
couldn't think of it. Yeah, if people see it as moving yoga and it's a way of keeping active in their old age, fine. Yeah, I'm fine with that. But don't then tell me how it should look in a fight. If if you can't show me an example of how Tai Chi is supposed to look in a fight,
Yeah.
I don't think you know how it should look in a fight.
Right on.
Like
Right on.
I can use you as an example. I can get your videos up anytime someone says, "How does Tai Chi look in a fight?" And I can say, "Look at Mike Graves. You know, this is him fighting full contact. This is how Tai Chi principles work in a fight." When you've got people saying, "Well, it should look like this," because they are principles. Tai Chi can work in any number of ways because the principle of peng, people will tell you like, oh no, it's when you expand. It's like, well, no, that's not. Like
Right.
peng is just an outward movement. I could block someone, it could be peng. I could hit them, it could be peng. You know
Right on.
this, but the difference between me and you being these people that never actually spar or compete or do anything else, is I know when I use my peng, whether you're telling me I'm unskilled or I'm a basic beginner or anything else, I know that what I do works. Whereas
Right.
you, the other person, doesn't because you've never tried it against somebody actively trying to hurt you. You know,
Right on. Yeah.
and I
And
think it.
okay. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think the struggle is if we're going to sort of save Tai Chi Chuan, as it was, as it is, to try and draw some people back in that want to do it. Because we don't need, UFC fighter level people doing Tai Chi. We just need a few people that are sort of interested in it as a martial art. You don't have to go into a sparring session wanting to kill people. You can just,
Right on.
as in that video I shared the other day, just people having fun, exploring how they think Tai Chi should look against resistance. And just like the HEMA guys when they're hitting each other with swords, you just try to recreate how you think it should have looked.
Right on. And what's interesting about that, right? So I find it interesting in the thought of thinking about all the varied styles out there, right? So you have, the five main styles, Sun, Chen, Wu, Hao, Yang, and all of the business, right? But inside of each style, we know that even the family members did it different, right?
Yeah,
Because they had different attributes. They had different experiences that got them to practice it the way they practice it, right? And I think also we got into this mindset that we have to mimic the person that we got it from. And Dave used to tell us straight up, he would say, "You're not a carbon copy of me. You can't do what I've
yeah,
done. I have different experiences than you. You can't kick as high as I kick. You never trained for your kick to be like that. So you only can express it through principle and your understanding of it through the principle with your own attributes, right? So therefore, it's going to look different than when I do it. You know what I mean? Because I'm shorter than you. I'm smaller than you. He's like 100 and he's like 10 stone, right? So if I'm 11 and a half stone, I'm a little bit bigger than him. So what I do with it is going to be different than what he does with it. And then the next person is going to be different because your range is different. So
yeah,
the way you have to apply it is going to be totally different. And I think folks get so caught up with it looking like another person and the way they look doing it that when it goes to fighting, they think, oh, if it doesn't look like this, then it's not it anymore. And so therefore, I only
yeah,
could do it if it looks like this, and if and it should be this way because when he did it, it's like this. And then when did you see them do it? Especially these old, relics that we have in our arts. You never even seen them do anything.
yeah.
You know what I mean? You've not seen
Exactly.
them
Yeah,
do not one thing.
yeah,
So, what are you basing this on? Where are you getting that understanding from? And another point I want to make is, I posted this picture up and I was trying to get a different dialogue going on about it, but everyone kind of focused heavily on like it being a boxing stance and like, oh, they changed it because of this, that, and the third. And I was referring to in my mind when I posted was thinking about how stances over time evolve as we evolved as even fighters. Like when even if you look at the movies or even if you look at the traditions of fighting, usually styles are birthed out of this. What I'm doing over here didn't work well against them, so I need to come up with something different that's going to be able to combat what's there. So it's
yeah,
constantly evolving, right?
yeah.
So
As
do
MMA
people
does.
yeah. So the people in their minds think that people fight now like they did when the inception of Tai Chi came about,
Yeah,
or that they had access to the many different variations of the way people fought now as they did back then. People were a little bit more secluded as how they intermingle. Like obviously, we're living in a global world now, the most globalist world we have ever,
yeah,
right? Ever, right? Even through without even meeting, we can see people doing other things, right? Through the internet, social media, and all the good business, right? Do folks think that same thing happened back then where everyone had access to all these different ways of doing things and so um, they were able to create something that's going to encompass all that's out there. So things had to evolve. That's the reason why you have different family members doing different things, different styles of
yeah,
things being birthed out of these same family styles because that's the way it is. And so people just get so stuck on how someone did it in the early 1900s or the 1800s and thinking, oh, that if you're not doing it like that, then you're not doing Tai Chi, right?
yeah,
And it's doing it a disservice, and it's also creating this false sense of protection because it's like I can keep doing my stuff that I'm doing over here. Don't have to step out of this little kind of square box I'm in and say I am the only one that's doing Tai Chi. Everyone outside of it is doing it wrong, right? How are you going to prove it? Well, only way I can prove it to you if I kill you. Okay, then meet me here so you can kill me. No, I'm not going to meet you here because I don't have time for it, or what you're going to do is not even Tai Chi anyway, so I have nothing to prove. You're just going to be doing external style. Well, that should be even easier for you. If I'm doing
Yeah,
something external,
exactly.
then I
Yeah.
should be, I should be so subpar to you. I should be so inferior to you because you are the only one who's inherited this great art that you claim to have. I should be a piece of cake to deal with.
Oh, well, I mean, that is a great place to leave it because 'cause we're coming up to an hour, and,
Yeah.
it's no, but to me, that is fantastic. That is absolutely perfect response to it, is just what you said, you know, if what we do is external and it's basic and it's, you know, not highly skilled Tai Chi, we should be so easy to deal with. Like when we see you pushing hands with other people, you know, you really tone it down because you don't want to just shove them around. Yeah, that should be them with us. They should be able to deal with us so easily that they just embarrass us. But they're, they're nothing but excuses. So it's been great talking to you, Mark. I'd love to come onto your channel sometime.
Yes,
And
sir.
yeah, like I say, I've got to shoot. Got a missus who might divorce me if I carry on much
Right on,
longer.
right on.
And
Yeah, so I will recommend this then. On my channel, I want to do it for you because I want to talk about your transition into MMA and get a little bit more deeper with some questions, some specific questions about things, what you use and things like that in that environment and what you recognize as being, similar or in contrast to that and that you have to
I would love to
implement.
do
So,
that.
all right, so let's set
Yeah,
another date for that, offline, and then we'll do that.
yeah, awesome. Thank you very much. All right, catch you soon,
Oh
mate.
man, thank you, man. I really
Right,
appreciate it.
cheers. Yeah, bye.
Take care. Bye.